You're listening to Colorado Chamber Office Hours, a podcast that explores what matters most to business. I'm your host, Ed Sealover, Vice President of Strategic Initiatives for the Colorado Chamber of Commerce and editor of the Sum and Substance. Let's get talking. This Thursday, February 5th, the House Business Affairs and Labor Committee will hold its first hearing on one of the biggest business bills of the 2026 legislative session, the effort to once again change the Colorado Labor Peace Act. Now, for those of you who may have missed all the discussion around this topic last year, the Labor Peace Act is an 83-year-old law governing union organizing efforts at private businesses that is unique to Colorado in requiring two separate elections. The first election is standard to businesses in all states, and it requires a majority of workers casting ballots to vote to organize in order to form a union within that company. The second vote, however, is required only in Colorado, and it requires 75% of workers casting ballots to approve union security, which is the ability for the union to take negotiating fees, typically around 2% of most salaries, directly from workers' paychecks to fund negotiating efforts on behalf of the workers. Last year, a bill to remove the second election required for union security passed through the legislature with the support of every Democrat and the backing of labor advocates over the opposition of every Republican and many business groups. But it failed to gain support of the Democrat with the most power at the Capitol, as Governor Jared Polis vetoed it, saying that he did not see the hoped-for compromise between labor and business advocates. Today, we are talking with folks who hold differing opinions on this proposal. And first up is Democratic Representative Javier Mabrey of Denver, one of the primary sponsors of the measure, both in 2025 and 2026. Thank you, Representative Mabrey, for coming on Colorado Chamber Office Hours.
Yeah, thank you.
Now, we'll spend some time later in this conversation talking about why you view the bill as so important for workers. But first, I want to set the scene with a slightly different question. In my 20 years of covering the legislature, I've seen a lot of high-profile bills come back after initially dying in the legislature or via veto pen. Many of them, however, are significantly changed from the previous version. House Bill 26-1005 is very similar to last year's version, at least in its core aim of seeking to eliminate the needed second election. Why bring it back largely intact, and what gives you confidence that the final outcome could be different this year?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the problem has not changed. The wealthiest Americans have an immense amount of influence over every aspect of our government. Politicians are more likely to focus on the needs of millionaires and billionaires rather than being responsive to the needs of people who are paycheck to paycheck. People like my clients who live paycheck to paycheck struggle to live in dilapidated apartments in communities that used to be affordable. The affordability crisis did not go away. And last year, the Colorado legislature fought back. Democrats in the legislature passed the Worker Protection Act because we listened to workers. We listened to nurses, baristas, retail workers, janitors, people working long hours who are struggling to get by. And we looked at the data that showed that every single state that has higher wages than Colorado is a free bargaining state. And so I intend to bring this piece of legislation back until we get it passed. This is the right policy for the state of Colorado. You know, in 2010, Barack Obama was going around the country saying we need to do everything in our power to expand collective bargaining rights across this country. Well, here we are 16 years later. Colorado still hasn't heeded that call, and I think it's about time we do.
Understandable. I should mention that there is one change in the bill, and that's the addition of a provision, and correct me if I misinterpreted this, that declares it's not an unfair labor practice for an employer to refuse to agree to a lawful proposal if they're bargaining in good faith. Can you explain to me kind of why you added that and how that would change this bill?
It's a technical, it's a technical small change that doesn't impact the major underlying dispute here, which is just getting rid of the second election. So I haven't yet heard feedback that part of the bill is going to cause massive consternation from the business community. I think it was just lawyering and adding that clause in just for extra clarity.
Okay. Well, certainly you explained why you're bringing this back. I'm curious the second part of that, though. Do you think there's any chance that you will get a different outcome from the governor this year, who is already kind of come out and signaled he's up for vetoing this again? Or in some senses, is this bill more aimed at The next governor, after Jared Polis, is term limited and out of office following this session.
Well, so first off, I have not given up hope on Governor Polis doing the right thing and signing this piece of legislation. I've worked with the governor on policies that he was quote unquote skeptical about or leaning towards vetoing, and we've gotten him to a good place before. So I hold out hope we can change the governor's mind because, again, the problem has not gone away. And there are a lot of bills this year that are targeted at affordability, and you hear politician after politician after politician saying affordability, 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 like it's Beetlejuice. We're going to say it 3 times, and then affordability will appear. Stole that line from my friend David Seligman, who's running for Attorney General. This bill is actually aimed at increasing wages across the state. There aren't other bills that are evidence-backed that you can say would lead wages to increase across the state. So Governor Polis can be a hero for workers in an economy that is increasingly rigged against them. He can stand with every Democrat in the legislature and show voters across the country that Democrats side with workers.
Let's talk about raising wages, because I'm curious. One of the things I was wondering is exactly how this bill will play out if it were to become law this year, next year, anytime like that. I'm wondering what changes you think it would bring to the landscape of Colorado workplaces. And I know, and we've talked about this before, Colorado has the lowest private sector unionization rate at about 6.7% of any state that does not have as what's known as a right to work law, barring mandatory union membership, even in workplaces that are unionized, requiring, mandatory union membership. Do you believe there would be a significant increase in efforts to organize workplaces? And if so, are there particular sectors that you look at and say, they really need this bill?
Yeah. So I think first off, it's important to acknowledge that Colorado has half the union density of Minnesota. We have a third the union density of Washington State. And if you look up, there are various metrics. The Chamber of Commerce puts them out. U.S. World News puts them out. CNBC puts them out. And they rank states in terms of how competitive they are for business. I've seen Minnesota ahead of Colorado. I've seen Montana ahead of Colorado. I've seen California ahead of Colorado. I've seen Washington State ahead of Colorado. And so I first want to recognize that a lot of the talking points against this legislation are, it hinders our business environment. I think there's very little evidence of that. I also want to point out exactly what you said, how low Colorado's union density is. I believe that's a crisis. There is so much work that we can do to improve working conditions and fight for higher pay for the working class here in Colorado. And, you talk about what sectors we would like to see this in. The service economy, certainly I know there's been some great organizing efforts around like workers at the airport. But I deeply believe that every worker deserves a union and the right to collectively bargain. So I think any sector where we see an increase in organizing activity would be great for workers across the state.
And I don't think anybody's going to disagree with you that workers are having a harder time with cost of living in Colorado, which has been ranked as high as the 3rd most expensive state in the country. But as I was looking through rankings of highest annual average wage, Colorado ranks between 7th and 9th on most of those lists as well. You were talking about affordability, and certainly boosting worker salaries is a way to help affordability. But is this enough? Is this going to be that? Or do we need to look at other things like housing affordability, like why costs are so high on goods and services here to really help out those workers?
So every single state that's above Colorado on those rankings are free bargaining states where it's easier to form a union and there's higher union density. So I just want to note that. But of course, we have to do more, which is why I'm super proud to be on House Bill 1, which is the HOME Act. It's aimed at making it easier to build more affordable housing here in the state of Colorado. I'm proud to be on a bill that is aimed at banning surveillance pricing I think everybody understands that our phones have become extensions of our brains. We put our most intimate thoughts into them, our text messages, our location data, in our notes. People journal in their phones. Well, the biggest companies in the world are collecting that private data and selling it to some of the other biggest companies in the world who are setting individualized prices. And that means we are being price gouged based on what some of the biggest companies in the world think is our pain point. Excited to be on legislation to ban that. And I know there's some great other bills. We introduced an affordability package yesterday that aims at some other predatory pricing practices that are happening here in the state of Colorado.
And for anybody who just heard that and said, wait, what are those bills? Don't worry. I think we're going to come back and talk about those in future episodes. Two last things I want to ask you on this one, though. First of all, just so people who may not necessarily follow this can understand, why is it so important to get rid of the second election specifically? Why is that the big issue that this bill tries to deal with?
Yeah. So the second election, to form a strong union with a union security clause, is so detrimental to organizing efforts because it gives employers a second bite at the apple, another opportunity to engage in union busting tactics. I have a study here in my binder that analyzes the amount of money some of the largest employers in the country spend on union busting. They hire sort of anti-union organizers to intimidate workers, to, threaten them that maybe their hours are going to get cut or their pay is going to get cut or the firm's going to shut down. The second election subjects workers to unfair intimidation when they're trying to organize, and it's undemocratic.
Fair enough. Opponents, however, will tell you that the second election is important, not because it's an obstacle, they obviously don't believe it isn't, but because it's a whole other thing to let a union take money from an employee's paycheck, whether or not they supported it. Are they wrong in that? I mean, shouldn't it be a higher bar to let people decide whether or not they're going to give up their money to a union for negotiating fees?
They are wrong in that, and I think that the evidence is borne out in the fact that, again, I'll just reiterate that every single state that has higher wages doesn't have this second election, nor are they right to work states, which actually go a little bit further than the second election. The other thing that I'll add is, in every free bargaining state, if the workers do not like their union security clause or their union, they can vote to decertify with a majority vote. And so the idea that you're going to get workers trapped here is ridiculous. If they don't like the union, they can vote to reject the union. If the majority of workers like the union, it's probably because it's fighting for higher wages, better work conditions, and doing so successfully.
Well, Representative Javier Mabrey, thank you for sitting down to talk with us on Colorado Chamber office hours, and we'll be eager to see what happens with this legislation over the next 3.5 months.
Great.
For the second part of our podcast today, we are speaking with Representative Chris Richardson. Representative Richardson, a Republican from Elbert County, is the ranking member on the House Business Affairs and Labor Committee, which will be hearing the proposed Labor Peace Act overhaul on Thursday. He also was an active participant in the debate last year and has a few thoughts he can share on why he's not as keen on this bill as Representative Javier Mabrey. Representative Richardson, thank you for joining us here today on Colorado Chamber Office Hours.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, let's start with the basics, Representative. What is it fundamentally about this proposal that sets off alarm bells for you?
This has come through repeatedly, as you mentioned. That was part of the debate last year when I first joined the legislature, and it brings forward really a dramatic change to the Labor Peace Act, something that served Colorado very well for over 80 years and really balances and provides protections as it stands to both labor and management. What it's seeking to do is remove something that's very unique to Colorado, which is a two-vote system, one vote to organize, which is carried out under the federal rules that cover such things. It's a majority vote of those that are here and allows folks to organize in a way and have representation. But what's unique to Colorado is a second vote, a higher threshold to actually provide a security agreement or essentially payments to provide bargaining and perhaps lobbying. And that's where I have an issue is if House Bill 1005 goes through as written, it removes the second vote, which provides a pretty high threshold, and I think one that makes an awful lot of sense when you're compelling your fellow workers to pay dues. If this were to go through as written, with no second vote, with no restrictions, there's no quorum requirement in federal law. So if you have 100 employees and 3 show up, 2 could compel the other 98 to pay for lobbying and dues that they may not want to. So I think there's just not only a right to free speech type thing here, but a right to association and freedom of association. In this case, compelled association that I think it trips over. So I mean that's my basic concern with this. We had heard last year that this is a barrier to unionization, to collective bargaining, and it isn't. I mean, clearly the Act's been in place for 83 years, and we have union and non-union shops all across the state. Every business sector has union and non-union shops. If somebody feels like they'd like those protections or those capabilities provided to them, they're free to join a business that is unionized. If they don't want to, they can still work their craft with somebody that has a non-union shop. But if that conversion is going to happen, having the voice of everybody well represented is important. I think right now it's a 75% threshold of all employees, or 75% of those that are present for a vote, or 51% of the entirety of the employees, whichever is higher. So you're generally going to get a 50% plus one requirement before somebody's compelled to pay dues. And I think that has served us well. There's a lot of things in Colorado that need to be worked on, and economically and in affordability and the ability of employers to pay higher wages to their people versus higher fees, or accommodating more compliance costs that we should be looking at versus changing something that's worked so well for so long.
And I want to come back to those in a second, but I want to ask you first, are you surprised that we are debating the exact same bill again this year? And if so, do you think this bill is meant for a purpose other than we're going to try to pass the governor who vetoed it?
You know, I'd never pretend I could get inside the head of some of my colleagues. I have noticed over the years, certainly now that I'm much closer to this, that bad ideas don't tend to die. They just come back in a different form. In this case, it's almost the same form, which is somewhat surprising, but they're obviously committed. They feel differently about this. I haven't talked to the sponsors directly. I know you have, but often what is said about a bill isn't as important as what the bill actually says, and I focus on what the bills say. And this is really a redo of last year with no changes. I expect the arguments will be same. I expect the outcome in committees will likely be the same, but.
And then it's up to Governor Polis. You said you focus on what the bill says. It's always important, too, to focus on what the bill does. I'm curious, you've got a lot of smaller, locally owned businesses in your district. How could a bill like this affect those kind of businesses?
Well, again, there's really no level at which a business and their employees there can always be outreach from a larger union to start a bargaining unit. So I think right now this truly to me becomes a distraction, perhaps a worry whether it's baseless or not. Our small businesses are struggling with so much right now in this state, and to add one more change, any change. I mean, when we're talking, throughout the state, 500-600 bills considered a year, 400 plus. A large fraction of those actually impacting how businesses operate. Just any one more change is just one more thing that our small businesses need to worry about. And when you're talking a small business, I mean, truly the mom and pops, the sole proprietors, they don't have compliance departments. If they have to reach out just to get an assessment of what this means to them, it's paying an attorney that adds to overhead. And again, it takes away from what they can provide to their workers already.
And I think you've started to kind of go down this path, but I want to ask you, I mean, why do you think small businesses, and frankly, businesses of all size in this state, are struggling? What is it that kind of is weighing them down, especially as it comes to things that you as a legislator can deal with?
Well, I think we have passed over the years, again, so in my second year here, I was a county commissioner for 8 years prior and very involved with our local businesses and economic development within Alberta County, and actually as the chairman of the Eastern Colorado Council of Governments, which has a strong economic development component across the plains. We have just been, frankly, killing our small businesses with regulation. Not only regulation, but legal risk. Over the last 5 years or so, there's been roughly about 10 new or expanded causes for action for civil suits that can be brought. There's obviously the regulatory compliance piece, and so the level of risk to a small business of a fine of a few $1,000s can wipe out all their net profit for a month, and that needs to be reversed. I mean, we don't want to leave our consumers unprotected. We certainly aren't trying to make a playing field that is not level for employees or punish those on the employment side, the employee side, but there's got to be a partnership between both sides in this. And when we're creating new regulation, what I've heard as recently as earlier this week in committee, when I asked if the organization that represents the body that they were considering regulated had been talked about and talked to in the development of a piece of legislation, I was told that the people that are regulated really never want to be regulated, so why would I talk to them, essentially? And when it comes down to it, what comes out of the building has to be practical and not one-sided. So I don't doubt the sincerity of those bringing bills, that they're trying to fix something they perceive as a problem. But if we're not all at the table and we're not all understanding what the practical impacts of a bill brings, we're going to make it harder for everybody. And I don't think we shouldn't be setting people up to fail. And that's kind of where we're at. If we don't have, in this case, if we don't have labor and management, if we don't have business interests as well as labor interests represented to work on something that is better, if there is something better. And again, the fact that we're often very proud of things that only Colorado does. In this case, it seems that we're not so proud, or at least the sponsors aren't so proud of something that is uniquely Colorado and has worked so well for us.
Well, Representative Chris Richardson, thank you so much for talking with us about not just this bill, but kind of the bigger layout of regulations and things that may be weighing on businesses. We'll be really curious to see what happens in committee on Thursday.
As will I.
That's it for our interview segment. Now let's take a quick look at what you need to know about the week ahead. All right, everybody, here are 5 bills to follow for the week of February 2nd to the 6th. First of all, the bill that we just talked about at length, the bill to remove the second election from the Labor Peace Act, is going to be up at 1:30 p.m. Thursday in the House Business Affairs and Labor Committee. The hearing will be held in House Committee Room 112. Secondly, Monday at 1:30 p.m., the House Finance Committee will consider House Bill 1036, which would permit local governments to ask voters to establish vacancy taxes on homes that sit empty for certain portions of the year, a portion that would be determined by each local government individually. This bill would exempt short-term rental properties and would be aimed at second or third homes that owners typically don't rent out. The aim, municipal backers have told me, is to incentivize those homeowners to rent the property to local workers. This, too, will be in House Committee Room 112. Third, at 1:30 p.m. Tuesday, the House Transportation, Housing, and Local Government Committee will hear the centerpiece bill in Governor Polis's affordable housing package this year. This bill would allow nonprofits, schools, school districts, local housing authorities, and regional transportation districts to build housing on the plots of unused land that they own that are 5 acres or less. And in doing so, it would allow them to build by right up to 3 stories or 45 feet tall, which permits them to get around local zoning laws and would cut an estimated 30% off the time on their permitting process. This hearing will take place in Legislative Services Building, Room A. Finally, number 4 and 5, there are 2 bills on childcare that will be worth watching. On Monday, the Senate Education Committee, meeting in Senate Committee Room 357, will hear SB 20, which streamlines a number of regulations on childcare operators and would grant new centers provisional licenses to operate for as long as 9 months, even if they're caught up trying to get local permits to open. Then on Thursday, the House Finance Committee, meeting in House Committee Room 112, will hear HB 1004, which would extend income tax credits that go to individuals and companies that donate to local child care centers and are equal to 50% of their contributions. Reminder, Colorado has an estimated shortfall of 75,000 needed child care slots, and the inability for caregivers, particularly women, is estimated to cost the state $2.2 billion in annual impact because they have the inability to go back to work when they want if they can't find care. That's why these are, in many senses, business bills. Finally, a reminder that if you want to testify on any of these bills but cannot make it in person, you can sign up for virtual testimony by going to leg.colorado.gov, finding the bill number that you wish to testify on, and putting your name down there. One caveat I want to offer with all of the bills that I just mentioned is that schedules can change at the last minute. So if for some reason one of these bills that I talked about drops off the calendar, I apologize, but they're scheduled to go as of this recording. That's all for this episode of Colorado Chamber Office Hours. Once again, I'm Ed Seelover, Vice President of Strategic Initiatives for the Colorado Chamber of Commerce and editor of the Sum and Substance. I'll keep the conversation going at tsscolorado.com, and we'll see you next time as we explore the issues that matter most to business.